The Women and Children's Program supports women that are at risk of homelessness. We offer services within the community, mental health, education, housing, childcare, and support on their parenting journey.
Without the Women and Children's Program, there would be a lot more women on the streets that would be staying in situations and relationships that were not healthy for themselves and their children. These cycles would continue to get worse.
Since being here, I have had my daughter day in, day out. I have learnt how to be a parent. I have learnt what it requires to look after a baby. And I've also learnt what it's like to be a mum and bond with your child.
My hope for the programme would be that we would have more villas. We don't have sufficient villas to meet the needs of the referrals that we have, and I wouldn't have to turn away families the way that we do.
What I would say to donors is keep donating, as they can expand and give families another chance at a better life.
Hello and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Susan McCarthy, the Chief Operating Officer at Flourish Australia, and I oversee all of our services and supports, including that one you just got to see around the Women and Children's Program, which often tugs at the heartstrings. It's such an amazing program for women and children. So it's wonderful to see so many people join us today for International Women's Day 2026. I get the honour of hosting today, and it's really great to come together for what I know will be a thoughtful, generous and energising conversation. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this event takes place on Aboriginal land. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to extend that respect to all First Nations people joining us today. In a few moments, we'll be formally welcomed to country, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to ground our time in that recognition. So I'd really like to introduce Binui Bales. Binui is a proud Koori woman born on Gadigal country in Redfern, New South Wales, with deep connections to her father's country in Queensland. She descends from the Eora, Wurundjeri and Bundjalung nations of New South Wales and the Gunagalu, Birigubba and Woolly Woolly nations of Queensland. A mother of three and a kinship carer to many, Binui is passionate about closing the economic gap for First Nations people and advocating for inclusive, culturally appropriate change that empowers communities for generations to come. I'd now like to hand over to Binui to do the welcome.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for the invitation to come back and welcome. Before I do welcome, I just want to share with you how that video that you just played at the beginning really touched my heart. I was a single mum at 16. My mother had just passed away, and I had done it rough, going from, lounge to lounge, refuge to refuge, state to state, just, really trying to make ends meet. And if only there was support services like that, maybe my childhood or my later teenage years would have been much better. So I'm going to do as much as I can to spread the word. And the second message I want to say is Happy International Women's Day. What a day to come together to celebrate all that is being a woman. I think I know something about that, having 9 sisters and the diversity of the ages ranging from 55 to 29, and then all of the 37 children that come after that. So I'm very honoured to be here today. So formally, when we welcome to country, we introduce ourselves. That is the protocol, introducing yourself, who you are and where you come from, and then laying out your intentions. That's the essence of an acknowledgement of country. And whilst I'm mindful that you're all joining from different lands, under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act, the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council has custodianship of the lands around Sydney Basin. So I can do a welcome here, but I think it's just due to protocol best that I do a standard acknowledgement of country, and I'm going to speak in language just so that we're all brought to the present and also how can I say, we're raising the vibrations of the ancestors. We are inviting the creator spirits in, and we're asking them for their blessings, for their guidance, for their protection, for their nurture, for anything that you're in need of. Our creator spirits and our ancestors are always there. We just have to ask and invite them in. So I'll be doing that in language. Bodiri gamro, ngaya bimbibila binui ngaya garagal nyura, ngaya wayanga yura wanarua bandilang yura ngaya biana birigaba, kangalu waka waka wuli wuli nyura ngaya ngi binui miti biti ngaya Redfern, garagal nyura ngaya ngi biami wandina garagal nyura. So we invite the mother spirits, the female spirits, the male spirits in to provide those protections and blessings while we walk country. Each and every day, not just, today. So in language, I said, my name is Binui. I was born here and raised in Gadigal country. I actually live on the same street that I was born in and that my mother was stolen from. I live in the same block that my grandmother was stolen from and my great-grandmother was stolen from, and her mother and her mother and her mother. So all of my matriarchs were stolen. And we can take it back to 1824 was the earliest record, when they rounded up the Aboriginal people from the various areas of Sydney or of Australia, and they placed them into various camps at this time. And then they created these institutions where they were later taken to. My family migrated to the block in Redfern, where I'm still raising my children. And over the years, we've done a lot of research to connect. My mum done her journey to find her mob. So we found we are connected and related, descending from the Wonnarua people, which is the Hunter Valley. And then on another side, we have the Bunjalung, which is the Northern Rivers. And my dad's side, we've really been raised really strong in dad's culture. Because when we left Redfern in 1992, we were able to move to Queensland and immerse ourselves. I was 7 years of age, immersed myself in culture, done traditional song and dance, and really found myself. And we created an all-women's dance group. So me and my sisters, we belong to Julpan, the seven sister dreaming. That's the Pleiades, when you look up into the sky and you see the stories. That's what me and my sister, my sisters had a dance group. And we traveled the world doing traditional dance. And from that, we were invited to all different Aboriginal communities to dance, to do ceremony, to share culture, to just be, to learn. And I brought that back to Sydney with me in 2005. And I am very passionate about reviving culture and language and history, and sharing it and preserving it for all Australians, because I truly believe that it is up to everybody who calls Australia home. It is up to us to be honourable in our intentions and in our actions, in caring for each other and in caring for country. And I believe, us women really have a foundational position to empower our men, our brothers. And that's what I'm finding. I'm finding in my life, I have 3 sons, and being a strong woman and coming from a family of strong females means I can raise strong, proud young men and confident young men. So, that's my story and that's where I come from. I work for the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, and on behalf of all of us mob, we say, Wan Gari Warami, hello and welcome. Wan Gari Gamarara, welcome to all my friends. And then I'm not going to say welcome to the lands of the Gadi. I'm going to say I acknowledge the many lands from the places where you are joining from. Let me pay respects to the people of that place, the ancestors, their dreaming spirit, their language group, the elders. I pay my respects to all elders, the elders of this land, my elders, the elders of those lands where you're joining from, and to your elders too. Because without all of our elders, we wouldn't be here. So I acknowledge our strong matriarchs, our elders, for the love, the nurture, the resilience, the strength that we've inherited, or that I've inherited. I thank my matriarchs, and I'm sure you all do too. Let me ask our ancestors now for that guidance and that strength so that we can continue to do the work that needs to be done in many spaces. And this welcome to country, this acknowledgement of country, it is an invitation. It's an invitation to all Australians to come and walk together as one Australia. We understand that there are certain things that Aboriginal people have to do, which is traditional custodianship and obligations to country. But there is so many responsibilities for our allies, for Australian citizens, for people who call Australia home. There is so much here to be done. So let's look after country, let's look after each other, and let's raise, strong young children for the futures to come. Because my grandmother's closing legacy, or my grandmother's legacy, was honourable ancestor. And she says our actions today determine the kind of ancestor we will be to the children of the future. My granny says, we need to ensure that the future generations have those inherent rights to fresh water to drink, clean air to breathe, and good food supplies to nourish and sustain all life for as many generations in front of us as we do behind us. So it is up to all of us. On that note, I say Gidirigora, which means thank you. Thank you for the invitation to provide the welcome acknowledgement. And I truly, 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 wish you all a successful, prosperous, happy, healthy 2026 and beyond. Yano Yano. We don't have a word for goodbye because we believe we'll see you again. So Yano Yano to each and every one of you.
Thank you so much, Binoy. You shared so much about yourself then, and thank you for doing that. The sadness that you mentioned in some of that too, but also all of the history too that you mentioned and your ancestors. Thank you so much for sharing it. I really, really respect that. Often when I hear you speak, I feel completely grounded and also energized at the same time, which is just incredible. You're incredible. Thank you for doing that for us today. So now I also just want to take a little moment to talk a little bit about, off the back of what Binoy just said too, around how far we've come. I think that's also a good point in reflecting around mental health and gender. So this year has been a particularly meaningful one for us at Flourish Australia. In 2025, we marked 70 years since our organisation began its journey. 70 years ago, conversations about mental health were often hidden, misunderstood, or completely silenced. Support was limited, stigma was widespread, and the voices of people with lived experience were rarely centred. Yet over 7 decades, we have seen extraordinary change. We've learnt that recovery is possible, that people are experts in their own lives, that connection, dignity, and hope are really not nice to haves. They're actually essential for all of us on this call and our well-being. And that progress doesn't happen because of one voice, but because many people choose to speak, to listen, and to stand alongside one another. That story of progress, and let's face it, often imperfect and hard won, and to be honest, definitely unfinished, mirrors the story of gender equality. International Women's Day invites us to reflect on how far we've come, and just as importantly, to ask where we must go next. This year's theme, Give to Gain, reminds us that real change is collective. When we invest in others, when we give time, opportunity, trust, and a voice, we really don't lose anything. We actually gain so much. We gain stronger communities, healthier systems, and more inclusive futures. There are so many powerful parallels between the journeys of mental health reform and gender equality. Both require us to challenge outdated narratives, both demand courage, and not just the loud, visible kind, which is important, but sometimes the quiet courage it takes to show up on those difficult days. Both ask us to redesign systems that were not built with everyone in mind, and both are sustained by people who refuse to accept that this is just the way things are. At Flourish, we know that well-being is deeply connected to inclusion. When people feel seen, valued, and safe enough to bring their whole selves into the world, mental health improves. When barriers are reduced, when voices are amplified, when leadership reflects the diversity of lived experience, everyone benefits. And I think today that's really why International Women's Day matters here. It's not a symbolic moment, but a really good reminder of our shared responsibility to keep pushing forward. For women, for people with lived and living experience, for communities who have been marginalised or overlooked, and as Binoy said too, for future generations who deserve better systems than the ones they inherit. Today's conversation will explore courage, resilience, well-being, equity, storytelling. It has it all. Themes that sit at the heart of both mental health recovery and gender equality. And there is no better person to help us explore those ideas than our guest today, Sam Lane. But just before we get into the session itself, I want to acknowledge that progress doesn't always look like a headline or a milestone. Sometimes progress is simply getting through the day. Sometimes it's choosing to stay. Sometimes it's telling the truth when it would be easier to stay silent. Over the past 70 years, Flourish has grown because people, and I'd like to say women, have continued to just do that. to lead with courage, to care deeply, to advocate, to challenge, and to imagine something better. So today is both a celebration and a commitment, a celebration of how far we've come and a commitment to keep giving so that we can all continue to gain. And I just want to thank you for being part of this and thank you for all the roles you play in shaping a more inclusive, compassionate future. And I think with everything going on in the world at the moment, compassion is definitely what we need. And I'd really like now to hand over to Lisa, our Executive Director of Lived Experience Leadership, to do an introduction of recognition of lived experience. But just before I do, I just want to say a little bit more about Lisa. And she's a passionate advocate for human rights, inclusion, and systemic change. With over 14 years of experience in the mental health, alcohol, and other drug sector, she has led initiatives in workforce development, co-design, and lived experience engagement. Lisa is committed to amplifying the voices of people with lived and living experience, ensuring they are central to service planning, design, and delivery. Her leadership continues to drive cultural and structural change that empowers individuals and strengthens communities. And now I'd like to hand over to Lisa.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, so the reason why I am excited to do the recognition today, because I am a woman, obviously, but I'm also a mother, and I'm now considered a midlife woman. So I will let you guys make up what that means for me as someone who identifies with a lived and living experience of mental health issues. And I'll be honest, coming into one of the more challenging periods of my own life today. So with that said, I want to deeply recognize people like myself, and I'm sure many others online, who have an experience of mental health challenges and recovery, emotional distress, suicidality, alcohol and other drug use. At Flourish, something I am so proud of is that we honor the strength, courage, and insight that comes from navigating these experiences, and the wisdom that the people who use our services, our staff, bring when we all share our stories. I also want to recognize families, carers, kin, and supporters. Those people who walk alongside those of us through times of vulnerability, hope, and recovery. Your care, advocacy, and love are an essential part of the wellbeing and recovery journey that we go through. I also wish to honour all people with lived and living experience who are here with us today, particularly those who might sit in identified roles like myself, who use their own recovery journey to challenge stigma and ensure that our services remain human, compassionate, and grounded in real experiences. Today, especially as we gather for International Women's Day, I want to personally acknowledge women who, like myself, have often navigated inequality, silence, trauma, and stigma, and sometimes at the most vulnerable times of our lives. And yet we continue to stand up, we continue to lead, advocate, and support others. Your voice, courage, and leadership are changing systems and creating spaces where future generations of women can be seen, heard, and supported. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and thanks for also sharing your lived experience too. We really, really appreciate that as well. So now I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Sam Lane. So Sam is an award-winning broadcast journalist, author, keynote speaker, and one of Australia's most respected voices in sport and culture. Her distinguished career spans print, television, radio, and podcasting, and she's currently co-host of ABC Radio's flagship national program, Summer Grandstand. A trailblazer in Australian media, Sam forged new ground in men's AFL coverage and was an inaugural member of Channel 7's AFLW broadcast team, becoming a trusted authority from the competition's first season. She has reported from Olympic and Commonwealth Games across the globe and covered both the men and women's Tour de France for the ABC. Sam is a highly sought after interviewer and event host, having led high profile conversations with figures such as Andre Agassi, Helena Dokic, Adam Goodies, and Luke Longley. Her name is consistently praised for its depth, warmth, and meticulous preparation. She is the author of Raw, the account of the AFLW's creation, and the Inside Out, the biography of sporting icon Erin Phillips. Sam is also a proud ambassador for Flourish Australia and a committed advocate for equity, wellbeing, and inclusion through sport and storytelling. I'm so pleased to welcome Sam here today. Welcome, Sam. It's great to have you join us.
Thank you, Susan, and for the warm introductions so far that include Lisa and also Binaway. Binaway said she was moved by the opening video package. I hope that I speak for everyone and not disrespectfully in saying that I was totally moved by Binaway's welcome and her sharing a part of her life, but also, as you said, grounding us, but also energising. I'm on Gadigal land and I want to acknowledge that as well. I'm really grateful to Flourish for having me today. I admire your work deeply. I wish I could be more of an active ambassador. It's an absolute joy to be here with you today, with the audience. Thank you for logging on and being interested, because I agree with you and Lisa Binaway and you, Susan, you framed it beautifully. It's International Women's Day again. Call it International Women's Day every day, if you ask me. There's a lot of work to be done still, and we will cover that for the world that I want to bring my daughter up in. She's 19 months, and just as a bit of an insight to everyone, when Susan and I met a few weeks ago to begin preparation in earnest for this, I think I was having a curveball day because yet again, Pearl wasn't able to go to daycare because of illness. I'm a single mum. She's 19 months old. I had this Flourish, briefing, and I thought, I can't do it. I can't log on. And I was kind of guided to just do it anyway. And the way that Susan was able to just, compassionately, patiently, and very generously, all the things that you've said you hope we get out of today's session, the way you were able to help me through that, to help us for today, was terrific and says everything about you, but also about the organisation that you work with. So I'm really thrilled to be here, Susan. And yes, if I can be thoughtful, generous and energising, like you said, then, I'll feel extra good about today. And I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. Look, I feel like you've already just done those things in your opening remarks, so that's fantastic. But no, we're so pleased to have you, and any time you can give to Flourish, we really value. So thank you for making this time today as well. So I will get into the, hard-hitting questions. I did joke with Sam saying that I feel like because you've got such an amazing career and you've done so much in this space and you've also done so much hosting, I was like, I feel like you could be the host, the facilitator, the speaker, the lot. But anyway, we'll give it a go.
It's just actually not true. But anyway, thank you. I took it as a compliment.
Definitely is. And just for the audience too, I appreciate some people putting questions beforehand. I've tried to weave some of those themes in the questions. Some of them I've still got and I'll try and get to. And for anyone online who wants to ask a question, please put it in the Q&A and I'll look at that throughout the session as well. So, first up, Sam, the International Women's Day asks us to imagine a world free of bias and discrimination. And where have you seen the biggest gains for women in media and sport? And where do you think we need to accelerate action?
I think numbers is the first point. So when I joined the Age Sports Department, it was a very, very rare setting in sport because the chief football journalist was a woman, Caroline Wilson. The chief tennis writer was a woman, Linda Pearce. The chief cricket writer down the track was a woman, that was Chloe Salto. There were women editors, but the Age in Melbourne was a very, very different place to any other sporting setting that I was aware of in terms of media, where it was dominated by men. So numbers is the first thing, because the Age now is less of an extreme example of women in positions of power and authority in sport and in media. There are more women now on television broadcast of sporting events. There are more women on radio. There are more women in leadership positions in sport. So I think to even drill into that a little bit more, it's always perplexed me and actually really bothered me when we tick a women's box by having a woman just there, and I'm not in any way downplaying the role of host, but I would say typically the safest place to have put a woman in sports media was as host, a person that simply, and I'm again putting that in inverted commas because it's a difficult job, but to ask questions, to anchor, to throw, to guide, to marshal, and to be there kind of static. The progression, I think, of women in sports media in terms of television and radio coverage was then for women to hit the boundary line, literally, to be on the sidelines, to be calling the action in that sense, what they saw on the boundary line, be it to camera, be it on the radio. Then I would say a huge progression was a woman doing ball-by-ball coverage, certainly in AFL men's footy. That was enormous. The sad state of affairs with that story in the beginning was that she was essentially, derided largely and didn't last very long in the position. So the people that had the courage to elevate Kelly Underwood to that position were not able to withstand the public pressure that was saying, we don't like her voice. I've never heard that said so consistently of any man, not to mention criticism of hair, makeup, or wardrobe. The progression I see now that I really like is women being expert commentators. So there's boundary, there's ball-by-ball play, there's hosting, but the expert commentator is sort of like the revered figure in sports broadcast who's an All-Australian, a premiership player, a Brownlow medalist, Dally M, insert, championship, insert accolade. When women are sitting in those roles, and they are few and far between in men's sport, that's epic change in my view. Because what you are doing there is, and there's so few expert commentators actually, when you break it down in sports media, that for women to be sitting in that space in men's sport is, I think, it's enormous. We see it a lot more in women's sport. So if you were tuning in to the AFC Asian Cup right now, the soccer tournament that will be, featuring the Matildas for a month, and we hope right up until the pointy end, you'll see, broadcasters trumpeting and loving the fact that it's perhaps an all-woman team. But we never see an all-women team covering men's. And I wouldn't expect to see that, just like I wouldn't expect to see an all-men's team covering a women's soccer event. But there's a joy with a little bit of discomfort in me still around that, because I think what I would like to see ultimately is just balance. So I think in some ways we're still in the position of extremes. It's either all women or one, and there is no doubt that the progress in between that has been huge when I consider the time that I joined the broadcast fraternity, but I don't think it's quite balanced out to the point that I'd really love to see soon.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Sam, and just how you sort of took us through the different stages as you're talking about the different roles. You can kind of, you can think about how that has morphed over time for women. How do you think we achieve that balance?
I think it's all about who forms the broadcast teams, and the people who form the broadcast teams are the managing directors of television stations and radio programs, and they appoint who brings us sport. They decide if someone is a boundary rider or an expert commentator. They decide whether they're going to give someone a go or even nurture someone in a lower league with a mind, with a career path of, hey, we think there is something in this person and we're prepared to, place them so that we can build them up, rather than like putting them in, throwing them, almost like a lamb to slaughter sometimes, which I think is what happened with Kelly ultimately. Kelly, for those who may not be aware of the trajectory of her career, has only risen. She is now a regular commentator on Fox Sport, but interestingly is sometimes still placed as a boundary rider, such as for men's grand final, which I do find kind of interesting. Anyway, Kelly has absolutely kicked on. She's now got an Order of an Australia accolade for her pioneering and ongoing wonderful work as a sports broadcaster. But she's had a lot of rough and tumble along the way. So how does it change? It really is about the decision makers, because there is, in my experience, no shortage of women and non-white men who want to be in these roles. The trick and the challenge is getting the opportunity.
So changing some of those decision makers' thoughts and feelings around some of this, and also getting more influence in there too around how they make the decisions.
Yes, and I've felt for a long time that there are sort of generations in sport. You know, if I consider when I was in, deep AFL men's coverage mode, when it ran my life, when it was a full-time job and I was doing The Age, Channel 10 and ABC Radio, so 3 media, and I really wasn't getting a day off a week. And it was around the clock just to stay up to date, if you were doing your job properly. When I consider that, there wasn't much change in terms of leadership. I think where the change will come is if the leadership itself also has a generational change. So there have been people there for decades, that old argument of like, why would you give up that job? And, they don't. But someone around there, be that boards of directors or just, appointing some other people in senior management roles to have serious influence around long-standing bosses, that will help the change.
Yeah, which kind of comes back to your earlier point around the numbers. I know it's not just about the numbers, but the numbers are also important, right? And to have
Yes.
representation. So it is also good to look at that.
They're crucial.
So you sort of touched on it then a little bit, but we know you forged new ground in men's AFL coverage and you helped build the trust in AFLW from its very first season. I'd be really interested to know sort of back then, what did it feel like doing that for you? And how do you work within that environment when you're really trying to be a trailblazer in both of those settings?
Yes. When I started in men's footy, it was almost like a mantra within myself that I will not think about my gender. I will just try to do the best job. When I think back on that, and I was, all of 21, I think, maybe even 20, it was probably a little bit rigid and a bit blinkered. And, had I been a little bit older, I might have been more aware of it's okay to think that I'm a woman and maybe I'm being treated differently or whatnot. I was just so blinkered on being professional and doing the best job. I was also conscious that doing the best job looked a lot different for me than it did for a male colleague, male colleagues in general, because I was constantly under the impression that I needed to prove myself. And in a way, I felt, a real pressure within myself to meet that challenge and to prove anyone that was doubting my bona fides wrong. And that took a lot of extra pedaling, put it that way. The feeling of covering men's, therefore, didn't feel like a pioneering thing. It just felt like a challenging, very exciting job. Mm-hmm. By the time the AFLW came around, it was, more than a decade later. It was 2017 when the first AFLW game was played. I, by that stage, was well established, and, I think it's safe to say it in this company, it helps to win awards, to be showing that you are someone that is respected, that does good work. And so you gain more confidence because within your industry, you're not just an infant trying to prove yourself anymore. You're a legitimate person who is part of it, even if you're still, fairly unusual because of, in my case, your gender. So by the time the women's came around, I had been writing, and some would say advocating, championing, some would say too much, for women to be included as players in the game that I've covered most closely, which is Aussie rules. And it drove some people mad. It caused some people, even again, much loved and trusted and still liked colleagues, to say, you don't believe this is really going to happen, do you? Like, women are not going to get a league. Like, you don't believe it. And I was like, no, I totally do believe it. And when it came to be, there was I put it in Raw, my book that is about the birth of AFLW, that it was like, to make it all happen, it was like little silos of activism working on patches that eventually became a patchwork quilt. And there was someone who I would say is the now Governor General of Australia, Sam Mostyn, who was the first woman commissioner on the AFL, who got the thread that was golden and managed, with her dexterity, her expertise, her knowledge and know-how, to weave all these patches together. And that was the ultimate game-changing move to deliver us what eventually became AFLW. By the time AFLW happened, therefore, the people who had been heard, seen, respected, consulted, had actually developed this sense of like, wow, this is going to happen. And this is thrilling, because to these people, the passion around this vision was burning for years and years, decades, lifetimes in advance. And so you asked me how I felt covering AFLW and still covering AFLW. It's the most incredible feeling. It's kind of a microcosm of how from little things, big things grow, that all these people who, and we'll get into examples later, I'm sure, were just ignored, overlooked, treated with disrespect, dismissed, actually became key figures, now members of the Hall of Fame, oh my gosh, in the AFL. And there's now this women's league. So to be part of that, it's not, I'm yet to meet anyone within the AFLW who is like over the top, wrapped about themselves in that. Like, it's just like this incredible feeling of a collective who could, in the end, a little collective that could. I think the most passionate thing now is just the frustration that many of us still feel that AFLW is still being kept in a corner, and we have vision about how that could change. We don't think that these changes are particularly hard or particularly challenging, and yet they're not being made, and we're nearly 10 years down the track. So the feeling I feel in men's setting, at least when I was younger, to women's setting, I would say is actually night and day. I was an imposter here. Here I was part of what I call a movement bigger than sport.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love your how you talked about it in the patchwork kind of quilt sort of moment, right? And it's true, right? Change comes, it's often not one thing, it's a collective of lots of things that make it happen. And I guess to your point there too, it doesn't stop there, does it? There's more to do, but you keep on going, thinking, there'll be that other moment where, someone comes in and gets to tie it all together and make that next step happen. So and yeah, really interesting, Sam, the stuff you talked about when you started in like AFL in that sort of male world, or was a male world, and almost trying to show up and not think about being a female, really, which I think a lot of us could relate to when you're in those settings and you don't want to come off at the time as too female. And then you realize later, what was I thinking? But it is a real pressure, and I think still very much exists in some settings for women around that need to act a certain way depending on the group you're in.
I agree, and you've reminded me just with that little comment of annotation that I remember, and I was really young, a male, very senior journalist at another newspaper once made the comment to me, "Oh, you never show your skin." And I just I had not even thought of that. But maybe I had subconsciously because he was right. But to kind of have that pointed out, I was a bit confused by it. I was a bit troubled by it. But now on reflection, I suppose I go, one, it was, I mean, he was just being honest and he was right. But well, yeah, what was going on there on both levels?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's hard, isn't it, when you're trying to make it in an environment? Sometimes we do show up in a certain way because we think that's the way you make it.
Yeah.
That's the people around you. You can be also role model or modeling off what they're doing too. So, but yeah, I think it's a really great reflection for all of us actually around how we show up into a room and what drives it,
Yeah.
particularly for women. So I guess on all of that too, there is so much to talk about in everything you've said. When you think about women's leadership today, what's one narrative that you'd love to retire about all that and perhaps replace it with something else?
Yeah. I'd love, I'm going to turn that around just slightly because I would love to see a day where we have retired commentary on a woman is now, insert the head of the Australian Sports Commission, the general manager of, X footy club, the president of RA, a broadcaster. I'd love to retire those big milestones, and yet we can't retire them yet. So I don't want to retire them yet because the true narrative right now is still that there aren't enough of those big positions or just the big numbers being filled by women. And in that, I'd include broadcast figures. So, I want more women to watch sport. I want more women to attend sport. I want more women and girls to be participating, being members, etc. So I want to retire those headlines, but we need to be at a day when we can, because I think it's fair to say that currently some people get tired of those headlines and they say, oh, drop that, like stop talking about it. I'd love to stop talking about it, but I say we can't because it's still a major gap. It's something that needs to be addressed, and we fool ourselves if we think that simply creating women's leagues, that having a healthy Matilda squad, having a great Australian women's cricket team, having great elite performances by women in sport, and having broadcasters, if we think that that is changing the experience of all women and girls out, who knows where around the country, we really do fool ourselves. Vic Health this past week launched a new campaign called Set the Standard. They have specifically targeted community and grassroots sporting clubs, coaches, committees, leadership teams, not elite sports settings, to combat racism, because I get it. Sports bodies are very conscious more than ever of getting their house in order, having protocols, being able to manage situations when they arrive, which I celebrate. But to be ignoring community sport and settings would be a very big mistake. So I hope that answers your question. I want to retire that headline, but I don't want to retire it yet. I just want to get to the day where we can.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Yeah, and I know exactly what you mean. It'd be nice that we don't have to call those things out, but like you said, we still do, because we can't drop the ball on any of that. So I think it's a really good point. Sam, just one thing, but someone's commented they're finding it hard to hear you and I a little bit. So perhaps we'll just talk up a bit or turn up our volume, and hopefully that solves the problem. Sorry, slight little housekeeping issue. I hope that helps for the person who made the comment. Let us know if it doesn't. The other thing I really want to talk to you about is actually your book, Raw, and how it talks about the creation of AFLW. I'm really interested in what the story taught you about change making, persistence, and even backlash.
It didn't change what I thought I knew about change making, because I thought I knew that change making is so hard. it can beat you down. It can beat you down to the point where you walk away and you decide that your energies, time, and heart and expertise are better spent elsewhere, and that a setting that you've been working on and working in is actually not worthy of your efforts because you're not being heard and you're getting no traction. I thought I knew that. I thought I knew that change making can look like being bullied, ostracized, ignored, vilified, and that's all true. Writing the book gave me the experience and, thank God, the tangible proof of stories along those lines from women and men in football, in men's football, and men and women who had been working only in women's footy settings, who were brave enough to do what not many people do in the really pointy end of what I call the AFL jungle, and that is be critical of the AFL machine. It's a really powerful thing. What's the terminology about someone is a good hater? Certainly under past leadership, I wouldn't apply it to current leadership, but it is the legacy. It's a modern legacy. The AFL has been a great hater of anyone that disrupts, of anyone that is out of control. And this is not just about women. This is about issues that are dangerous, scary, and potentially litigious, such as racism, concussion, general discrimination, homophobia. So I can be specific about this because it is true. When I began, Andrew Demetriou was the CEO of the AFL. I had people coming to me telling me that plans to work to combat homophobia that had been commenced with the AFL had been shelved. I had enough evidence to write what became a back-page lead story of the Age Sports section, and I got bullied and publicly derided by Andrew Demetriou on public radio. Now, it was actually not me at that point making opinion. It was a news piece. And in fact, the then Victorian head of the Equal Opportunity Commission, Helen Zoki, was the one that was quoted, and Andrew chose to take out me rather than Helen. You can understand why. The reason I point out that anecdote is because when it happens, it can happen publicly like that, but it can also happen in the most subtle ways where, as I've learned, people suddenly find themselves out of the circle. They're not in the tent anymore, and they've become too hard, too difficult, too dangerous, too disruptive. We don't want that in here. It's not helping us. Yeah. And so in writing the introduction to Raw, because that was really like an essay, I think it was about 65 pages. To anyone that's interested, I did recently record it finally as a podcast that's been released. It's free. It's on Spotify, Apple iTunes. It's called Raw. And I read with the people that I quote in the book. So Sam Mostyn, Shiloh Curtis, Jan Cooper, Debbie Lee, a whole lot of people, Gillan McLaughlin. They read the lines that they gave me for the book. And we do sort of an audio book with them. And it was so important to me. They're saying their powerful words, as they said to me in their voice, but for this recording. I digress slightly, but it's just taken me back to the process, because what I learnt in Raw and writing that introductory essay was that people were willing and they wanted to share these stories, but they were scared. And that it had to be legaled, it had to be changed. There were bits I couldn't stack up, even though I was certain they were true. But so be it. That, you know, as a journalist, sometimes you just have to sit with that and live with it. But I learnt all sorts of things, such as Jane Holman, who was at that point the most senior woman who had ever been appointed internally at the AFL in general management. She was an HR general manager who'd come from corporate Australia, from banks, from all sorts of like high flying companies, but she landed in the AFL, huge sports fan. And she encountered a lot of backlash and didn't stay at the AFL, I think I could put it this way, for as long as she had hoped. There's Jan Cooper, who was the very first woman boss. She was the first boss of women's footy that the AFL had ever appointed, and it was under game development at the time. It was a part-time role at the time, and her salary, which was under $100,000 annually, was heavily debated at general management meeting at the time because they didn't think it was a worthy spend. Jan shares with me in Raw that, you know, as this boss of women's footy, which we were consistently told even back then is the fastest growing area for game development and for the AFL to explore, Jan requested to meet with Andrew Demetriou, the then CEO, multiple times. She said to me, I have a 3-strike policy, so I reckon I probably tried 3 times. She definitely tried twice and never got a meeting with him. Jan is now, for what it's worth, on the board of directors of the West Coast Eagles. She's been honoured in the West Australian Hall of Fame for her pioneering and trailblazing and mighty work around women's footy. Sam Mostyn, who is also quoted throughout that introduction, now Governor General, was the first woman to join the AFL Commission. Sam tells the story in Raw of how she knows, because she saw it with her own eyes, that when other commissioners would talk to her and she would start talking about women's footy, she sensed that they were time checking. She could see them sort of almost nodding off. She got a sense that every meeting was like they were waiting for her to raise women's footy. She asked a group of general managers of the day, should I go and present the medals at the Women's National Championships? Because I've been invited. And she says in Raw that no one said don't go, but no one gave her the impression that they thought it was a good use of her time. Sam Mostyn, with her incredible brain, with her incredible network, with her incredible care and ramrod straight focus, found other ways to get around the system that she was actually in, to use her platform of power and privilege to galvanise what I described earlier as the people that were the patchwork that she joined together, to make such a compelling case in the end that the Commission had to agree to back this competition. So what I learnt didn't change what I thought I knew. It just gave me first-hand accounts, really brave ones, some that I wasn't able to include, of the challenge, to say the very least, of what it took to get to the point which is now a, you know, happy, shiny, all-inclusive arm of the AFL, which is the Women's League.
Amazing, Sam. And as you're talking about the book and so passionately about everyone's experiences and how they shared them with you, and how confident you are in talking about this too, it did make me wonder, I guess, is there ever times where you decide to, you know, call something out or not call something out and just sort of push forward quietly? Like, how do you make those calls? Because you, as I said, when you're speaking, I think, wow, you're a complete trailblazer. I'd be right behind, you know, backing you all the way for everything that you stand for. I'm just interested in, and, you know, in all of this, and also all those politics of what you had to navigate, I'm sure, through developing Raw as well. How do you feel in those times when you encounter bias?
Yeah, I'm grateful. Thank you for saying what you just said. I am grateful that, in a way, like the Women's League and Raw and the experience that was, you know, so clear, you know, when you're dealing in fact, it's kind of easy, even if people don't want to hear or read the facts, because you can be confident in the facts, especially as a meticulous journalist, which I am. So now I do feel confident about some of those things. However, before that, because it's almost like in my life, if I'm thinking on the spot here, it was like pre pre AFLW and then post, yeah, and it's like two different eras within myself, and I guess there's a growth in professionalism and confidence and age, but also within the league itself, because women are now legitimate. It matters. The investment's huge. If it fails, why? It's been mismanaged potentially. So in the era previous to AFLW, when I would have felt much less confident, and yet I wouldn't have felt less conviction about, my observations or beliefs in many ways certainly about inclusion and diversity. I do remember there was a moment where, we were always encouraged, this was in a television setting, to suggest stories, for the coverage. And there was just a day where I just sort of felt like a little bit like the Sam Mostyn example, where she had a sense. They didn't say, "Oh, shut up, like we're waiting for you to say this." But I just got that sense that there was an eye roll or 10 in the room where I was, look, if there was another woman, that woman, managed the team and booked flights. There was no other broadcaster that was a woman in the room. There was no one other than me as a woman in the room contributing to the editorial content of the discussion. And I suggested that a story idea we could do for this upcoming broadcast would focus on a woman who was sitting in a men's coach's box, it's a men's game, who is, I probably won't fill in the details of who she was, but I think, and I stand by, I think it was a really good story. But that day, for whatever reason, I felt the eye roll. And I got a call after the meeting from someone in the meeting, just giving me some sort of advice for free, all couched very nicely, but that, maybe don't make every suggestion about women. Yeah. And that's, you might say, well, that's probably good. Most of my suggestions probably were, but that was because I was probably trying to balance that every other suggestion was like by and large about men. Yeah. So like, I don't regret being that voice, but it was being noticed and it wasn't really appreciated, and it certainly wasn't acted on in this moment. And so what I had to nut out to get to your question is, well, if I can't raise that, if I'm going to get eye rolls, I need a man, like frankly, I need an ally who will get it and raise it for me. And I'll have to cop that when he says it, it will probably be a great idea and it will probably happen. So quite organically, I recruited an ally. We recruited each other because he made it known to me that he wanted to help me. And we spent many hours randomly, and often after broadcast, sitting down in hotel bar rooms, like after the broadcast, and him kind of saying, right, what do I need to know, kind of thing, like, let me help you. Some people might listen to that and go, oh my God, like what a patriarchy. But I needed it. Yeah. And it was a strategy that I think helped me. But I wasn't getting, in some cases, I wasn't getting the traction that I hope that maybe today I would in that setting. And that was a men's footy setting.
Yeah. Wow, you touched on so many things there, Sam, that were great. Like just around, I love, you're talking about, conviction and confidence to bring something up. So sometimes, we may not say it, but that doesn't mean it changes our resolve on the issue either. But also allies, right? It is such a fundamental part of any reform, any change. You need people on your side, and it's not always the people that are obvious, that are like, of course, women supporting women, but that's not always just what you need, right? We do need men, like you just touched on there, bringing him into the fold, because it does make a difference. And, I think Binawee touched on it earlier about her bring her 3 sons up to also think these ways about women too. So it's about how do we bring everyone into that to make the change. I think it's a really important point in everything around trying to change anything, but particularly gender equality as well.
And to touch on our earlier point and your questioning about how could that be different these days, if there were more women in that meeting, if there were more women at the head of that editorial group at that time, it wouldn't have been a problem. But at that time, it was too challenging for the hierarchy that was in place, which was 100%. Well, I was the non 100%. It was men.
Yeah, exactly. It's also about recognizing the evolution of things too, right? And how that can change as well over time. But what do you need to do right now in order to make the change?
Yes.
Look, I have so many questions, but I also realize that we're getting close to the time. So I'm going to slightly change gear, not too much, but and we'll ask a couple of audience questions as well. But I just wanted to ask you, looking back on all the things you've spoken about today, plus many more within your life, what achievement are you proudest of?
Professionally.
Yeah, or anything really, whatever you want to share, Sam. But
Yeah.
yeah, as a
Yes. So professionally, and that, really, it was my focus really from, finishing or even being in university. It was like, I want to be a woman who broadcasts sport. So it's been it was my life. It defined my waking moments. So I'll start with the professional. And there is no question, it's the birth of the AFLW. For all the reasons that we've described already and gone through, that this cohort that I still currently think is being undervalued actually got the platform that it deserves. And it needs a bigger platform, but it's probably a sports panel that we'll do one day. So that the birth of AFLW is the first one. And then I guess some little microcosm examples. You mentioned in the introduction a few athletes, Luke Longley being one. I worked with him yesterday, fellow Flourish ambassador. Working or encountering athletes who are prepared to trust you to tell impactful stories that are not a thing about like how they can kick a footy or shoot a basketball or whatever accolade they've got or wealth or celebrity. Athletes who are prepared to be brave, and it doesn't need to be game changing necessarily, but it often is. It might be culture changing. When they trust you as a journo or a storyteller, a moderator, an MC, depending on, for me, what kind of setting it is, to help tell their story is like, it is the most incredible privilege, because I know that, and I'm sure most people on this call will have had a kind of experience at least of when you relay information and you just have to trust that it will be relayed faithfully and you lose control of it. And ultimately, if you decide to talk to a journalist or do media, you're putting yourself up for that. And so to be able to be Adam Goodes and sit down as he did with me and say, I wrote it down before, the love that I had for the game died inside me. And that was because of his experience of racism. It was front page of The Age and Sydney Morning Herald. It was back page and front page of the sports section. It was a double page feature that Adam, like, I can say it here, I'm not ashamed at all. He through his management, said, I want you to tell this story. Like, I want to tell this story to you, for you to tell. To work with him on the tour of the documentaries that he was involved in, The Australian Dream and The Final Quarter, was phenomenal. Just as it was yesterday to sit next to Luke and for him to go into terrain that he still is uncomfortable with going into in public, which is around mental health, and Flourish is well familiar of the speaking tour Luke and I did together, and some of the proceeds of that were donated to Flourish. To do that, I just don't take lightly. And then there are a couple of other women that I want to mention, like in footy, that really like blew the whistle. One was she was working at the St Kilda Footy Club. She was sort of tracking to be a coach, and very, unusual in a men's setting in an AFL club. Like, it was not unusual, it was unprecedented. And Peter came to me and told me that she was actually going to walk away. She had no job because she felt no career path at St Kilda. And she told me that in good faith. It ran on the front page of The Age, and because she was brave enough, because of how The Age, also I credit the editors, treated it, like the way they sympathetically did that, she got a trailblazing position as an assistant coach employed full-time at the St Kilda Footy Club. If she had not dared to tell her story publicly via the media, and she was uncomfortable about it, but she chose it, it would not have happened. She would have just disappeared. And then there are some women, Susan Alberti, Beverly Knight. There was a very small number of women directors for a while there at footy clubs. They'd been brought into AFL House. They got blasted by the CEO of the day. They told me about that. It was about that they'd dared to speak up to me about a skit that had appeared on the men's AFL footy show where Caroline Wilson, the most incredible trailblazing woman journalist, had been dressed up as a mannequin, and it was all like horrendous. They knew that the only way that they could advocate around this was to go public. So when they trust you because of what they believe about you, that to me is the greatest privilege, and therefore, like, wrapped around in a bow, they're the highlights for me. And then the personal highlight of my life, without a doubt, and I go back to Benoi and to you, Susan, and Lisa sharing as well. I'm a mother. I have a 19-month-old baby. I've been a sole parent from the very beginning. It is so hard, and it's also the best thing that's ever happened to me. She is the best thing that's ever happened to me. So she is my life highlight.
Yeah, it was lovely, Sam. Lovely to end on your daughter and being a highlight, and also all your professional. I'm sure there's a lot to consider in all of that, but amazing what you've done, and so grateful for you to share it with us. I just wanted to touch on a couple of questions, if we can, quickly. I know I'm running out of time. So much more I'd love to cover. There's someone in the Q&A who mentions to emphasise the importance of highlighting the intersections of Indigenous women and women with disability and women from CALD backgrounds. White women do have a better profile and privilege, which is then ended with a question mark. And I guess just to get your views actually on the diversity within AFL and sports as well, and what's your take on what's happening around those areas?
Yes, I can't see that comment or question, but I fully agree. It's like the first step, and I'm not laughing because it's funny, it's tragic. The first step is, get a woman. Again, I refer to an AFL setting, but there was an Indigenous football show where, that was where we could see and hear Indigenous people talk about Aussie rules. That has slowly changed. It began by changing, again, this is stuff I'm really uncomfortable with. Every year when the AFL Men's has an Indigenous round, then we'd suddenly see some Indigenous commentators. And it's like, what, you're just parachuting them in for now? And then for every other round, they're not legitimate. So it's a long prelude to kind of saying, and I hope this sounds like I'm totally backing the comment / question in the chat. It is like, yeah, if the struggle for women in sports broadcast media is like, 9 out of 10, we're beyond 10 if you're a woman of colour and in fact, a man of colour. And yeah, disability, I hate to say it, but I feel like I see it once every 4 years in number, and that's at Paralympics.
Yeah. Look, I think what the person commented on in the questions, and sorry, I think it was Nate. Sorry, the questions moved from my view too. But thank you for saying that, and I wholeheartedly agree as well, Sam. There's just so much more to do in that space across, not just sport, but many different sectors and fields as well. So yes, I think that's a role for all of us as well. Look, I'm conscious of the time, so I can't ask any more questions, unfortunately. But I really want to say thank you so much for so articulately sharing everything with us, so generously. The strength and kindness that you talked about throughout all of this was, it was really touching, actually. And I wish I could spend more time talking to you, Sam, about, I had so many more questions that I wanted to ask you, but I always overshoot the runway with my next time.
That's a sign of a good conversation and of someone who's prepared very, very well. So credit to you. And I hope for the audience that, if there was one nugget or one really interesting part, fantastic. Thank you so much for devoting some time to tuning in, and to Flourish for having me, Susan, for your great thought and beautiful questions. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day, but also a great International Women's Year every day. And thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sam. And thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you at the next one. So have a good afternoon.
Flourish Australia is a community-based not-for-profit providing practical support to people with a lived experience of a complex mental health issue.
We work alongside and complement other services to provide complex mental health support. This can include GPs, psychologists, other service providers and the government.
Flourish Australia has supported me in so many ways. They've helped me understand and manage my mental health. They've provided assistance with living, and they've also helped me find a house for my son and I.
Flourish Australia has provided me with work. I think employment is really important for my mental health because it sort of gives you something to do with your time, but you're also giving back to the community, which is really important for me.
We are a person-led organisation. We develop relationships with people accessing our services. We listen to people, for they are their own experts in identifying their recovery journey.
What sets us apart from many organisations is that a significant proportion of that workforce are peer workers who are integrated in teams across our service footprint and programs.
People feel safe really quickly with somebody that they think has been through some similar experiences. It's a beautiful kind of magic that peer work has that I don't see in any other discipline in quite the same way.
Flourish Australia has supported me with my anxiety. It's a very friendly environment and our supervisors are always there to help us.
It's about connecting with other people. It's also about family, like we feel like a family here. That's something I really appreciate about Flourish Australia.
Our programs help people become connected with their communities, to make friends, find work, learn new skills, find a home, and gain a sense of achievement. It makes Flourish Australia a safe place, a place where mental well-being thrives.